Imagine this. Over the course of just 4 brutal years, 5 American generals, out of more than 1,000 who served in World War II, orchestrated the deaths of 3.5 million enemy soldiers. That's more combatants eliminated than in some entire wars throughout history. We're talking verified kills on the battlefield, massive surrenders, and strategic maneuvers that left entire enemy armies wiped out or starving in isolation. Everyone thinks they know who tops the list. The flashy one with the ivory pistols. The guy Hollywood turned into a legend. But when you dig into the actual numbers, the cold, hard stats of enemy casualties inflicted versus American lives lost, he doesn't even come close to number 1. In fact, the general who racked up the highest body count did it with surgical efficiency, often without firing a shot in direct assault, forcing hundreds of thousands to die from hunger and disease after being cut off completely. This isn't about who was the nicest guy or who gave the best speeches. It's about results. Who destroyed the most enemy forces, captured the most territory, and broke the enemy's will to fight, all while keeping their own men's losses as low as possible. The rankings are based on documented casualties, exchange ratios, speed of advance, and how much the enemy dreaded facing them specifically. Stay with me, because some of these names will surprise you. One general moved his army so fast that German commanders thought they were fighting ghosts. Another, the youngest division commander in the war, jumped into hell with just a handful of men and held off entire panzer divisions. And the top spot? It goes to a controversial figure whose methods were so devastating that they saved countless American lives, but at a staggering cost to the other side. This is a countdown of the 5 deadliest American generals of World War II, ranked purely by how many enemies they sent to the grave. We start with number 5, a tough, no-nonsense leader who turned speed into a weapon deadlier than tanks or artillery. Lieutenant General Lucian Truscott doesn't get the headlines like some others, but in the summer of 1944, he pulled off one of the most stunning advances of the entire European campaign. We're talking about Operation Dragoon, the often-forgotten invasion of southern France in August 1944. Allied planners figured it would take at least 3 months for Truscott's 6th Corps to push north from the beaches, fight through fortified mountains, and link up with the forces coming from Normandy. 90 days was a conservative estimate. Truscott did it in under a month, 28 days, to be exact. Facing him was the German 19th Army, nearly 300,000 strong, dug in along the Riviera with orders to hold at all costs. Truscott's forces smashed ashore, broke out faster than anyone predicted, and then unleashed something he called a Truscott Trot, a forced march pace of 5 miles per hour on foot, double the standard rate. His infantry and armor covered 400 miles in 4 weeks, appearing behind German lines days ahead of schedule. The results were devastating for the enemy. Over 7,000 Germans killed in action, 22,000 wounded, and nearly 80,000 captured, many surrendering in entire units because they were completely outmaneuvered. Truscott's advance had one of the lowest casualty rates per mile gained in the entire theater. His men suffered far fewer losses than expected, while the Germans lost cohesion, supplies, and the will to resist. Enemy commanders started calling his troops a ghost army, showing up where they weren't supposed to be, hitting flanks before defenses could form, forcing constant retreats. Facing Truscott meant either pulling back fast or getting encircled and destroyed. His emphasis on relentless movement proved that speed could kill more effectively than sheer firepower. You don't need to slug it out toe-to-toe if the enemy is always running, abandoning equipment, and leaving prisoners in droves. Truscott's campaign in southern France cleared the entire region, opened vital ports for supplies, and trapped huge German forces against the Alps. It shortened the war in Europe by weeks, maybe months, all because one general refused to let his army slow down. Coming in at number 4 is a man who fought the war vertically, dropping from the sky behind enemy lines and turning lightly armed paratroopers into some of the most feared troops on the battlefield. Lieutenant General James Gavin, known as Slim Jim, was just 37 years old when he became the youngest major general in the U.S. Army since the Civil War. But age didn't matter on June 6, 1944, D-Day. Gavin was the assistant commander of the 82nd Airborne Division. At 1:51 a.m., he jumped first out of his plane over Normandy, leading thousands of paratroopers into the dark. Scattered drops meant he landed miles off target with only a pistol, a knife, and about a dozen men. By dawn, he'd gathered forces and captured Saint-Mire-Église, the first town in France liberated on D-Day. But that was just the start. Gavin pioneered vertical envelopment, dropping airborne troops deep behind beaches or lines to seize key bridges, roads, and towns before the enemy could react. In Normandy, his division was supposed to hold objectives for 2 days until seaborne forces linked up. They held for 33, against counterattacks from 5 full German divisions. The 82nd secured every assigned goal, blocking Panzer movements toward the beaches, and saving countless lives on Utah and Omaha. They inflicted heavy losses while taking serious hits themselves, over 5,000 casualties. But the ratio was remarkable for light infantry facing tanks and heavy artillery. Gavin's record across the war is staggering. From Sicily to Normandy, Operation Market Garden in Holland, and the Battle of the Bulge, his paratroopers defeated or tied down 23 German divisions. They caused around 23,000 enemy casualties while suffering about 16,000 of their own, a better than 1.5 to 1 kill ratio in fights where airborne troops were usually outgunned. Post-war interviews with captured German officers revealed something telling. When asked which Allied unit they feared most, many named the 82nd Airborne above all others. Gavin led from the front, always jumping with his men, sharing the risks, turning scared kids into unbreakable fighters. His tactics are still taught today. Vertical attacks disrupt plans, force enemies to fight on multiple fronts, and multiply casualties through confusion and isolation. At number 3, we have a general who commanded more American troops than anyone else in history and turned methodical planning into a meat grinder for the Wehrmacht. General Omar Bradley, the GI's general, led the 12th Army Group from mid-1944 to the end of the war in Europe. Under him served over 1.3 million men at peak, for full armies. And in those 11 months, his forces accounted for roughly 1 million enemy casualties, killed or captured. Bradley wasn't flashy. He was precise, almost mathematical, earning the nickname for running operations like clockwork. No drama, no wasted moves. Just relentless pressure that left no room for enemy recovery. His masterpiece was Operation Cobra in late July 1944. After weeks of slogging in the Normandy hedgerows, Bradley massed 1,500 bombers on a narrow 5-mile front, saturating German defenses. Then 7 divisions punched through. In 72 hours, the entire German line in Normandy collapsed. The breakout turned into a rout. Falaise Pocket, Paris liberated within a month. One German Field Marshal, von Kluge, committed suicide rather than face Hitler's wrath for the disaster. Bradley's forces kept rolling, liberating huge swaths of France with minimal losses compared to the slaughter inflicted. Then came the Bulge in December 1944. While others panicked, Bradley calmly analyzed reports, identified the main German thrust in hours, and repositioned reserves. His coordination with Patton's counterattack from the south crushed the offensive. German losses topped 100,000 irreplaceable veterans, while American casualties, though high, were sustainable. The final blow, Bradley's armies encircled the Ruhr industrial heartland, trapping 325,000 Germans in the largest single surrender to U.S. forces in the war. Enemies feared Bradley because there were no mistakes to exploit, no reckless advances that overextended supply lines, just steady, grinding destruction that made prolonged resistance feel pointless. Now we reach number 2, the general everyone expects to be at the very top, the one with the movie, the swagger, the quotes that still get shared today. Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., old blood and guts himself. Patton commanded the U.S. Third Army from August 1944 to the end of the war in Europe. In those 9 months, his forces inflicted an estimated 1.4 to 1.5 million enemy casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. That an average of over 150,000 per month. His army crossed 24 major rivers, liberated or captured more than 12,000 towns and cities, and advanced farther and faster than any ground force in history up to that point. Patton's philosophy was simple and brutal. Attack, attack, attack. Never give the enemy time to breathe, reorganize, or dig in He believed defense was for the weak, and that the best way to minimize your own losses was to keep the enemy too busy running to shoot back effectively. His breakout from Normandy in the summer of 1944 is still studied in military academies. After Bradley's Cobra bombing shattered the German line, Patton spearheads, 15 Corps under Wade Hayslip and XX Corps under Walton Walker, poured through the gap like water through a broken dam. In just 2 weeks, they covered 400 miles, swinging wide to encircle the entire German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army in the Falaise pocket. The slaughter there was staggering. Over 50,000 Germans killed or wounded. Another 200,000 captured. Tens of thousands more tried to escape through the narrow gap and were shredded by artillery and fighter bombers. Patton wanted to close the pocket completely, trapping every last man, but higher command hesitated. Even so, the destruction of 2 German armies in Normandy effectively ended any hope Hitler had of holding France. Then came the dash across France. Patton's Third Army averaged 35 to 50 miles a day, unheard of for a force of 500,000 men with thousands of vehicles. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles, but Patton's logistics wizards kept the fuel flowing. Towns that expected weeks of preparation to defend fell in hours. German commanders reported entire divisions vanishing overnight, cut off and forced to surrender. By September, Patton reached the Moselle River and the borders of Germany itself. Fuel shortages, diverted north from Montgomery's Market Garden, slowed him temporarily, but when the gas flowed again in December, he pulled off one of the war's greatest feats, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's last desperate offensive smashed through the Ardennes, creating a 50-mile bulge in Allied lines. Patton's Third Army was facing east toward the Saar when the attack hit. Eisenhower asked how fast he could turn 90 degrees and counterattack north. Patton replied, 3 days. Everyone thought it impossible, disengaging, pivoting 100,000 vehicles and 300,000 men in winter weather. He did it in 48 hours. On December 26th, the 4th Armored Division under Hugh Gaffey punched through to relieve the besieged 101st Airborne at Bastogne. The German offensive lost its momentum, and Patton's relentless pressure from the south turned the bulge into a killing ground. Third Army casualties were high, over 50,000, but German losses topped 120,000, including irreplaceable panzer crews and equipment. Patton's final campaign in the spring of 1945 was pure pursuit. His armies raced across southern Germany, into Austria and Czechoslovakia, taking hundreds of thousands of prisoners who knew resistance was pointless against the American avalanche. Entire corps surrendered rather than face annihilation. Enemy soldiers feared Patton more than any other Allied general. Captured documents and interrogations showed German troops calling Third Army the Ghost Army, or Patton's Phantom Divisions, appearing suddenly on flanks, cutting retreat routes, forcing surrender or death. The psychological impact was immense. Units that might have fought stubbornly against others simply threw down weapons when they heard Patton was coming. His kill ratio was extraordinary, often 10 to 1 or better in open warfare. He lost men, sometimes heavily when he pushed too hard, but he saved far more by ending campaigns quickly. Patton hated waste. He believed prolonged fighting killed more Americans than aggressive attacks ever could. So why isn't he number one? Because one other American general operated on an entirely different scale, against a different enemy, in a different theater, with methods that produced the highest raw body count of any U.S. commander in the war. And that brings us to the deadliest of them all, General Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Area Command from 1942 to 1945 accounted for approximately 1.8 to 2 million Japanese military deaths, more than all other American generals combined in both theaters. The numbers are so large because Japan fought to the death in most battles, and MacArthur's island-hopping strategy systematically isolated and starved entire garrisons. MacArthur didn't just defeat armies, he bypassed them. His genius was knowing when not to fight. Why storm a heavily defended island costing tens of thousands of American lives when you can seize a lightly held one nearby, build airfields, and cut the enemy supply line completely? The classic example, Rabaul. In 1943, over 100,000 Japanese troops were concentrated on New Britain, fortified into what was supposed to be an unsinkable fortress. A direct assault would have been another Tarawa or Iwo Jima, bloody beyond imagination. MacArthur skipped it. He landed on adjacent islands, seized airfields, and placed a bow under constant air attack while naval blockade tightened. Within months, the entire garrison was neutralized, starving, disease-bombed daily, unable to affect the war. By 1945, only about 70,000 survived to surrender. The rest died without MacArthur ever committing ground troops to the main stronghold. He repeated this across the Pacific. New Guinea Campaign. Bypassed Japanese strongpoints, isolated 150,000 troops who slowly withered. Philippines. Instead of slugging up Luzon from the south, he landed at Lingayen Gulf, cut off the main Japanese force in the mountains, and left them to rot. Over 200,000 Japanese died there, mostly from starvation and disease after being surrounded. MacArthur's campaigns were masterpieces of maneuver and economy of force. He used Australian troops brilliantly in New Guinea mopping up operations, preserving American divisions for the decisive leaps. His intelligence was superb, knowing exactly where the enemy was strong and where he was weak. The human cost of the Japanese was apocalyptic. In the Philippines alone, the Imperial Army lost over 500,000 men, most after being cut off and denied food, medicine, or ammunition. On bypassed islands across the theater, another 1,000,000 slowly died in isolation. American losses under MacArthur were remarkably low for the territory gained and enemy destroyed. His total combat deaths were under 20,000 across 4 years, a fraction of European theater losses, while eliminating nearly 2,000,000 enemy combatants. Japanese soldiers dreaded MacArthur's name. They knew facing him meant either fanatical last stands with no hope of victory or slow death by starvation in some forgotten jungle. His returns, "I shall return," became psychological weapons. Filipino guerrillas rose up knowing he was coming back. Japanese morale collapsed in entire sectors when his forces appeared on unexpected flanks. MacArthur was arrogant, theatrical, political, but undeniably effective on a scale no one else matched. He turned the vast Pacific into a series of traps, luring Japanese forces into positions where they could be neutralized without costly assaults. So when you add it all up, raw enemy combatants killed or rendered or to combat, MacArthur stands alone at the top. 5 generals. Millions of enemy lives ended through their decisions. Different styles, different theaters, but the same result: the destruction of armies that threatened the world. Truscott with speed, Gavin with courage from the skies, Bradley with precision, Patton with unrelenting attack, MacArthur with strategic isolation on a continental scale. They weren't perfect. They made mistakes, lost men, carried the weight of command decisions no one should have to make. But when history needed leaders who could break the enemy's ability and will to fight, these 5 delivered like no others. And because they did, the war ended sooner, with fewer total Allied lives lost than anyone dared hope in 1941. That's the real measure of deadliness. Not just how many you kill, but how decisively you end the killing for everyone. The American soldiers who pulled Bruce Carr from that stolen Focke-Wulf 190 that night couldn't believe their eyes. Here was a kid in a filthy flight suit, 3 days of beard, grinning like he'd just won the lottery, climbing out one of the Luftwaffe's best fighters on a muddy field behind the lines. Rifles lowered slowly. Someone shouted, "He's one of ours." Hands slapped his back hard enough to stagger him. Cigarettes appeared from nowhere. Questions poured out all at once. Carr gave him the short version. Shot down, evaded, stole the plane, flew it home. The GIs just stared at the 190 sitting there, with its black crosses and swastika tail, engine ticking as it cooled. One sergeant finally summed it up. "Lieutenant, you're either the luckiest son of a bitch alive or the craziest." Word raced up the chain of command. By morning, intelligence officers were swarming the field, photographing every inch of the captured FW-190, one of the cleanest examples the Allies had gotten their hands on that late in the war. Carr spent days in debriefings, drawing cockpit layouts from memory, explaining every switch and gauge he'd puzzled out in those frantic minutes. The information proved valuable. Captured German aircraft were gold for training and evaluation, but getting one flown involuntarily by an experienced Allied pilot? Priceless. A few days later, Carr hitched rides west until he reached his old base in England. The 363rd Fighter Group was in shock when he walked into the mess hall. Most had already written him off as killed or captured. His squadron commander nearly dropped his coffee. The place erupted. Guys who'd flown wing on him hugged him like a brother back from the dead. Someone produced a bottle of captured cognac. The party lasted until dawn. Carr got right back in the cockpit. The group had new P-51s waiting, and he wasted no time adding to his score. By war's end in May 1945, he'd racked up 14 confirmed aerial victories, plus several more on the ground during strafing runs, making him one of the top aces in the 9th Air Force. Awards followed. The Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross with clusters, Air Medal with more clusters than most pilots saw in a career. But the stolen 190 story became legend. It spread to the Army Air Forces like wildfire, briefed to new pilots as the ultimate example of what aggression and refusal to quit could achieve. Intelligence loved it for morale boost alone. To the guys flying daily over Germany, knowing one of their own had turned the tables so completely, it was pure inspiration. After the war, Bruce Carr stayed in the Air Force. Korea came, and he flew F-86 Sabres in combat again, adding mid-kills to his record. He retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1970, settled in Florida, raised a family. Quiet about his exploits most of the time, typical of that generation. But when old squadron mates got together, the stories flowed, and the 190 tale always brought the biggest laughs and widest eyes. He passed away on May 24th, 1998, at age 74. No big headlines. Just another hero from the greatest generation slipping away quietly. Yet his story endures because it captures something deeper than just daring. In a war full of impossible odds and heartbreaking losses, Bruce Carr refused to let the enemy write his ending. Shot down deep in hostile territory, facing capture or death, he looked at the situation everyone else saw as hopeless and saw opportunity instead. Most pilots in his place would have done the sensible thing, evaded as long as possible, surrendered if cornered, survived to fight another day. Perfectly honorable. But Carr couldn't accept that. Home wasn't something to hope for. It was something to take. That single decision to crawl through the mud, slip past guards, gamble everything on starting an unfamiliar engine and flying through hell, turned a personal disaster into one of the most audacious individual feats of the entire war. He's the only Allied pilot known to have stolen an operational enemy fighter from behind lines and flown it back to friendly territory. No one else even came close. It's the kind of raw courage that doesn't need medals or parades. It just stands on its own, a 20-year-old kid, alone against the odds, deciding that giving up simply wasn't an option. Stories like Bruce Carr's remind us why they called them the greatest generation. Not because they were superhuman, but because when everything said quit, they found one more way to keep going. Thanks for coming along on this ride. What an absolute legend.